Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to So What Are You Going to Do With That? Our Humanities alumni panel. I'm super excited about this event. I know I've gotten that question before. How many people have gotten the question like, oh, what are you going to do with your major? Well, spoiler alert, there's a lot you can do with your humanities major, and that's what we're going to talk to today with our awesome alumni who are here to share what they've done with their degrees. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to our Dean of Humanities, Jeffrey Cohen.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming today, and hello to everyone who is watching this on Zoom. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you're on Zoom, you should know that you're missing really delicious sandwiches next time in person. But we're happy to have this conversation today. I'm the Dean of Humanities here at ASU. We have about 4,000 undergraduate humanities majors all told, both online and here on campus. And I will say I've been here long enough where I know one of the hesitations that people have before declaring a humanities major is they really are not sure what you do with an English major, a philosophy major, a history major. And it isn't necessarily satisfying to tell them, well, you can do anything, but actually you can do anything. And I know that as someone who tracks where our alumni go, this is the amazing possibilities it opens up. I think sometimes people trick themselves into thinking that a professional degree like business will lead to a job in business. But to be honest, a degree in English can as easily open that door. You just have to be savvy about it, and we're here to help when it comes to those things. One other thing I'd like to say is I always teach an annual course called How to Make a Career with the Humanities Major. It's a freshman discovery seminar, and it always enrolls 25 people really quickly. So I do understand that, especially in these economically uncertain times, people should worry about what kind of future you're putting a lot of time into your degree. But I feel like anything I can do to put people at ease goes a long way. To my mind, a humanities degree is what sets you up to make the future that you want. That is, it puts you in charge of forging a career in ways that I think are really powerful. So we're going to start today by, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a short introduction of themselves, because nobody can speak their biography as well as they can. Then having done that, we have some prepared questions that we'll go through. And then we open it to the audience, both here and on Zoom, if anyone would like to participate, and we'll go from there. So why don't we just go left to right across the table and start our introductions.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Ventura-Zink. I'm on the public affairs team at Waymo, which is an autonomous driving technology company. And I'm an English major and excited to be here and chat with you guys because I am someone who got that question a lot. You know, what are you going to do with that? And turns out a lot of things. But I finally found, the career that I love now.
Hi, I'm Anita Huizar-Hernandez. I was a double major in Spanish and English literature, and I have the job that maybe a lot of you know you can have with a humanities degree, which is I'm a humanities professor. I just recently returned this fall to ASU, which I'm so delighted to be in the School of International Letters and Cultures. I've done a lot of different stuff along the way, in addition to being a professor, and as a professor, I've gotten to do a lot of things that really surprised me as well.
And hello, my name is Lu Nguyen. I am the senior video editor at ASU's brand team. My background is in film and editorial, though in television and film. I lived in Los Angeles for more than half a decade working on different TV shows and movies, and just any studio you can think of, I probably worked there too. So decided to move back in the summer of 2019 and join the Hub or the brand team in August of 2020. So happy to be here and be back and looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, my name is Paul Bergelin. I'm an alum of ASU, like all of us here. I got my bachelor's and my master's degree in history from ASU, and I currently work at the Arizona House of Representatives, where I'm a nonpartisan research analyst who specializes in natural resource issues. Happy to be here.
And my name is Anna Wills, and we actually somehow ended up in the same, we are counterparts. I worked in the state senate and he worked in the House, but I also specialize in the Natural Resources, Energy and Water Committee in the Nonpartisan Research Department. I just got there a little differently. My path, I also am an ASU alum, but I double majored in philosophy and political science. And so.
That's great. And I will observe that it always strikes me that our ASU alums are so much a part of the high functioning parts of our state government here. We have ASU alums everywhere, and they do the good work of actually making the state live up to what it should be doing for its citizens. And I'm really always proud to meet people, and many of our ASU alums are elected officials too. Okay, so first a couple of questions to start things out. I'm going to start with Paul. Paul, did you expect to be where you are now when you started your studies? Is that something that you always had in mind? Or if not, what kind of job did you think you were preparing for?
Not necessarily. When I started my studies, I thought that I was going into law school. And obviously for law school, you really don't need any prerequisites beyond having a really decent GPA and a stellar LSAT score. And that's your golden ticket in. And so I just went for whatever interested me, which actually was history, and it was also Spanish literature too. But I also had the misfortune of graduating around the time that the recession hit, and I saw what that was doing to the legal job market, to some of my friends who had graduated before me and who were saddled with 6 figures worth of debt and really not great employment prospects. And I decided that wasn't for me. So I did the successful thing and moved back in with my parents, did a bunch of odd jobs for I think the better part of 6 months till I figured everything out, everything from playing bass in theater productions, including the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was pretty delightful for the midnight screenings. I did bartending, I worked for a catering company, but I also did copy editing for some professors who I knew. And from that, I actually spun off some work and published my first academic article. And then I found out there was an opening at ASU's Master's of History program. And I really didn't know what else to do, but it seemed interesting. And along the way, I had also started to read books about water policy, and I decided to maybe steer a degree towards how water is managed in the Southwest. And so when I got into graduate school, when I was accepted, and I started working on my master's thesis, which was all about transporting groundwater, I knew that I wanted to do something that was involved in the water policy realm in Arizona. So from that point in graduate school, I had a pretty good idea that I wanted to do something similar to where I am now. But obviously, and this is probably something we'll all talk about, there is not a linear path in your career. Anyone who's ever gone to a point of being very well established in their career has not had a straight path. It's probably been circuitous and chocked full of absurdity along the way. So,
and one thing I would really want to emphasize, because I think we devalue so much of what we do. I always emphasize to my students that doing something like catering or anything that's public service teaches you skills that are useful for the rest of your life. If I had not waited tables in a restaurant, I don't think I would be able to get along with a wide variety of people my job calls me to get along with. You learn not to personalize it. Like, good things come out of it, things that seem like detours. So I'm glad you talked about that.
yeah.
Is that why you keep trying to bring these sandwiches over?
Amanda did notice I tried to serve everyone a sandwich. Anyone who didn't get a sandwich is welcome to on 20% tip is usually.
Well, and I will actually jump off that point. A lot of what Hannah and I deal with is a lot of controlled chaos where we're juggling 7 different tasks at the same time for people whose egos are not often easily appeased. So yeah, and so there's a very strong parallel between the skill set you use if you're involved in food service and the type of work we do, handling state policy for policymakers.
Well, that's really well said. Anita, what are some of the things that people who have been in your classroom might not know about your job outside of the teaching that you do? That is, are there things that they might find surprising about the job of being professor? Can you talk a little bit about it in its fullness?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a literary critic. My area of study is I research the literatures and cultures of the US-Mexico borderlands in English and in Spanish, and I focus in particular on Arizona, which is really fun. So in classes, I think people often expect to read, which we do a lot of reading. Please take my classes and, we'll read together. But especially now, I think the humanities are so open to lots of really interesting ways to engage with story. I got into literature because I was one of those kids who like stayed up late at night reading with a flashlight in my bed because my parents told me it was time to go to bed, but I wanted to keep reading. But I have now realized that it's about more than, published works and novels. It's also about, what is a narrative, and how in politics, how in so many different realms our narratives, the way that we understand ourselves and each other as well, in our relationship to each other. So there's so many different ways to interact with narratives. I've gotten really into more lately GIS technology. So I've had students, working in ArcGIS, making interactive map layers. I've also gotten into text mining and data analysis and writing Python code. So there's a lot of things that we do, which I will say humanities majors sometimes get a little bit nervous when they see the syllabus and we're going to be writing computer code and we're going to be making maps. But as we were talking before, really a lot of what we do is sort of thinking about how to think and thinking about how to communicate with other people across languages and cultures and experiences. And those skills are extraordinarily transferable and really exciting. I love what you say about a circuitous path, because even being an academic, I worked as a copy editor. I worked developing bilingual K-12 curriculum for a while. I was an RA when I was here at ASU, which I will tell you, being an RA is the most helpful things in terms of being a professor. I'm thinking about that. I've also gotten to do a lot of work in archives, which I didn't even know what an archive was when I started college. And so thinking about documents and what we choose to keep and what we choose to not keep as a society, what we preserve, what we don't preserve, and how that impacts us right now as well as in the future. These are things that I didn't know, even sort of wanting to pursue an academic path. And I think every year and every semester, I get more and more excited about the openness of the humanities. And I learn so much from my students who have these really varied interests and bring really rich perspectives.
That's great. Amanda, building on what Anita just told us, especially about creativity, inventiveness, storytelling, persuasion, can you talk about how skills you might have learned during your time in training here have transferred over to the job you hold now?
Yeah, so I work in public affairs, which is just a fancy way to say I work in narrative to help, change people's opinions or help them understand what my company is doing. So we work in emerging technology. We're creating something that has never existed before we started building vehicles that can drive themselves. And so a big part of what I do is based in what I did at ASU. I was a copy editor. I think there's 3 copy editors at least at this table. I worked, at our literary journal here. I was basically learning and absorbing as much as I could in terms of how you tell a good story, how you basically get down into what is like the 30 seconds. If you have someone's attention for such a short period of time, what do you need to tell them and how do you connect with them as quickly and as effectively as possible? And so a lot of that is relationship building. And that's something that is not on a syllabus, but it's something that you learn through working with your professors, working with fellow students, getting involved with causes that maybe make you a little uncomfortable at times, working with people with different opinions. And so I think there's a little bit of that creativity that just the exposure on campus really sets you up for success later in life. And really it's learning how to think, learning how to be a good human. I think that all of these things are kind of embedded in a humanities college track.
It's so nicely put. I love that. A lot of our students feel immense pressure to find the perfect job right out of the gate when they get out of college. And you talked about taking different routes and before you wound up where you are. What can you say about the benefits of maybe not finding the perfect job from day one, and rather just feeling like it's time to find my way rather than find my destination?
Absolutely. So I feel like this might deserve just like a teeny bit of backstory. So when I was little, I made these short videos with my younger brothers that my family lovingly calls Lou Productions. And so I just remember like being super excited, like to film with them, hang out with them. But my most excited feeling was when I would run home to my Windows Movie Maker, whatever. And so I would create these videos, show them, love that feeling. And so fast forward a little bit and mix that with like a love for movies. When it came time to deciding what to major in, when I was approaching university, I decided to major in English and film. And so I actually had that idea of like, I want to be a film editor, like a film animation editor. And so I gratefully got to experience that. I lived in Los Angeles for over half a decade, just pursuing different TV shows and movies, working in editorial, and then decided that, oh, I'm getting a teeny bit burnt out. Like this isn't maybe like right for me. And so after some like thought and taking some just like internal evaluation, decided to take a different route. So I moved home or Arizona, where I'm originally from. And that was kind of a weird period of time where I was like, what do I do next? And, that question of, so what are you going to do with that? This English and film degree. After deciding to move home, I recognized like, what can't I do with that? And so I ended up at ASU as their senior video editor. And that was just such a sweet like transition. Like editorial was my background, editorial is what I do now. But it also freed up the time to also pursue other hobbies that are becoming careers. So I recently signed with an agency in the Valley, and I pursue acting and modeling and voiceover acting. And so it's like all of these things, I wanted to be Lou, the film editor. And though I got to work on those movies that I, once dreamed of, like those skills that got me there make me a better what I am today. So I read this quote, and I'm about to tell a group of humanities majors that you are not a noun, actually, you are a verb. I heard this quote recently, and it's based off of an Oscar Wilde quote where it's like, if you kind of know what you want to do, that's great, but that's kind of also like not, it's like your punishment is what he says, which is kind of harsh. But when you actually don't know 100% what you want to do, but have like a rough idea, that it like you are a verb. Like I love editing, I love writing as well. I found out I love acting and I love modeling. Like we are not what we do, but it's very cool to be able to say, you know what, but I like doing this. Let's pursue it and see what it's like. And kind of like what everyone has been saying, by doing all of these different roles, it makes us a better, fill in the blank. For me, my time at ASU, I really wanted to understand like the foundations of storytelling. And when I get a script for an audition, you're meant to like look at the tones, figure out what the character wants. It makes me like so much, I think it's like a superpower. Like I'm able to quickly be like, oh, okay, so this character, their tone is this. In my audition, I can like let that shine. So I really do think, yes, we have these ideas of like what a perfect job would be. I thought I had that idea, did the perfect job and realized, okay, maybe it's not perfect. I don't think there is such thing as a perfect job, and just be encouraged that whatever you do will only make you a better whatever you want to be in the future. And I like what you were saying about just like being a human too. I think it makes us a better human at the end of the day. So yeah.
It's funny how we never talk about that either, right? The ways in which certain education can actually make you a more empathetic, well-rounded, connected people kind of person.
Yeah.
And that really matters.
Mhm.
Yeah. No shade on engineers too, but because humanities majors understand the difference between a noun and a verb, we got the joke too. This one is for Hannah. Hannah, what has been the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself and your career interests as your pathway has unfolded?
I think for me, the part of me that made me a really good humanities student was always in me, even though I didn't go to school right away after I graduated high school. I took kind of a different, more windy path because I thought I was surrounded by people who were like, oh, I know I'm going to go to school and pursue this. And I was like, well, I don't know that. So I guess that's not for me. I'm not going to go until I know what I want to do. And so as soon as I did go back to school, I learned that I just really enjoyed learning different things. I remember really falling in. I accidentally took a philosophy course, and it really was on accident. I thought it was psychology. Starting school was but it was on accident, and I loved the class. Oh, like this is so cool, just being able to kind of pursue these new and different things and just take classes for the sake of learning things, not necessarily for the sake of finishing a degree that you had your heart set on. But the part of that once I realized, oh, this is what makes me a good humanities student, this is what makes me good in this field that I do now, was always there. So I started a career right after I graduated high school in healthcare administration. And I learned how to not just enjoy that informational field, but also become really good at it. And it wasn't something that I was formally trained in. It was just something that I took the job and I learned how to do it. And I became passionate about the things that were in my everyday. And so I kind of gave a lot to trying to figure out what that field looked like and solve problems and do all these sorts of things. And then when I decided I was ready to go back to school, I wanted to pay my way. And so I decided to go into restaurants. And I found myself again becoming very passionate about, well, what kind of food do we serve? Where does the food come from? How are you a good customer service advocate? How do you communicate well with different personalities in your job, as well as different personalities of people that you're serving? All of those, and just being able to publicly speak. I took one public speaking course when I was in university, but before that, all I did was serve, and it really did teach me how to speak publicly, which is a huge part of my job now. And I don't think I would have been as good at it if I didn't have that training in just serving people food on a daily basis. And so when I got back to university and I found out that I really enjoyed pursuing this education, and then I got into politics and I got really invested into politics. And I don't know if anybody here is invested in politics, but it very quickly can burn you out and is exhausting a lot of the time. And you've got so much going on in politics. And then I learned that there's this niche in politics that's just policy. And that's what I found out, that you can just pursue policy and you can pursue the philosophy part of me is so excited that I had an entire degree to learn how to learn and read and comprehend and do all of those things. And it really prepared me for this position that I'm in now. Like, Paul is an expert. I mean, he is a water guy. He went to school and learned all about water, and he got this position. And I got this position, and I have learned everything I now know about water in like the last 2 months. So it really did, my job, my entirety of who I am as a person has prepared me to dive into the field, whatever job I'm working in, and do it well and pursue knowledge of that field. And it's been such a great experience. I don't know where it's going to take me next, because I have the capability within me, and I've learned within myself that I can pursue just about any job and do it really well, because I know how to communicate, I know how to research, I know how to write, and I know how to work with people relatively well. So it set me up quite nicely.
Those are some really great life lessons. And I can tell you, what we often have alumni come back, and a theme that often emerges is that it's not so much that you need to leave with certain expertise. Like, for example, Paul is ahead of many people in that studied water, studied history, ready to go. For a lot of people, though, they wind up in spaces where they're judged by their aptitude and skills, that is, their ability to learn, rather than what they've already mastered. It's very often you wind up in a place where it just would have been impossible to have had that background. The other thing that I'll say too, and I think it's a helpful reminder, especially because we're always finding ourselves in situations where we're overwhelmed, we don't know as much as anyone else does. Mastery of information is far less important than curiosity. As long as your reaction to your own ignorance is, oh, I'd really like to learn more about that, you get a lot more traction in life. Right? It's an invitation. So here's a question for the whole panel that kind of comes out of that. Looking back on your career, especially as an undergraduate, are there lessons that you have that you would like to bring forward to students here now? And I'm especially interested in, because you've so far really emphasized the skills portion of what you've done, and Many of the skills have been kind of along the way skills. Are there recommendations that you would make for students who want to make sure that they can succeed in the job market for learning technical skills as well as part of a humanities degree? And if so, what? This is a long way of asking. If you could time travel and tell yourself, I wish I had also studied X along with what I'm doing, what kinds of things might that be? So that's open to anyone who'd like to share.
I think I'll just throw out one answer and hopefully disperse some thoughts. I took, just as part of my degree as an undergraduate, I took one very, very basic level statistics course. And I regret that I didn't take more, because a lot of what I do in my field in my job is how numerical or quantitative information is communicated, specifically information in statistical nature. And it's not to say that I ever would want to be to the point where I could perform any number of sophisticated regressions or other types of analysis like that, but I do wish that I had in my undergraduate education taken a couple more statistical courses so I could have been more literate in how statistical information is presented and how to recognize type 1, type 2 errors, confusion over how variables are manipulated, or even just any other example of how statistical information can be misused to make a point, or may not be as precisely used to make a point. I wish I had done more of that. I've had to make up for that in my spare time, but I really wish I had taken a couple more courses.
Great point. Anyone else?
I think stats, one thing that I've, in addition to researching more on like stats, doing, online courses or just quick bite seminars, advertising, marketing, like those kinds of more practical skills that you can wing it to a certain extent. And sometimes people, even at agencies, are kind of guessing, how do you outsmart the algorithm in some ways? But I do think that's one where I had to do some extra work after graduating to become more literate, to use your word there.
Great.
Something I wish I would have done is do a little bit more research on what a day in the life of looks like for what I was interested in. And so I knew I wanted to be like a film editor, but I think I didn't know exactly what that entailed or like how one actually gets there, so to speak, until I actually like moved to LA, talked to some people, and I was like, oh, I could have, researched, this is my favorite film editor. This is what they worked on. This is how they studied. And so something that I think, I wish I would have known is just if you have like even a specific person in mind, seeing their career trajectory and like kind of like backtracking, like, oh, so they went to school here, they studied here, will help with the end goal too.
Building off of that, I think, especially when I was in undergrad, I was really intimidated by talking to professors, despite the fact that I am a professor now. I was a very eager student in class, loved class, but I felt like I didn't want to impose on people's time or, felt intimidated because of the way that academia is sort of set up. And I wish that I had taken advantage of mentoring more, both peer mentoring as well. And mentoring, I've learned now by this stage in my career, is so complex. You want mentors who are peer mentors. You want mentors who are maybe a couple years ahead of you. You want mentors who are a couple of decades ahead of you, who have ended up in all different kinds of places to get that sort of holistic perspective that you're describing, also because your priorities will change as you age. Like, I'm probably the only person on this panel with a small child, but different phases of your life, you have different questions. And I have found only truly very recently have I forced myself to approach people with this goal of building these mentor relationships. And it's been so enriching and so wonderful. And I think most people are really happy to talk to you. I think all of your professors, whether it seems like it or not, would be delighted to speak with you in office hours, outside of office hours. I absolutely love it when students want to talk about that. So I would say really do take advantage of that. Find the folks that can help you in the immediate, but also in the long term. And I think a lot of ASU faculty, ASU Humanities faculty especially, that's what we love. That's one of our favorite parts of this job. So that's also an invitation to everyone here. I do work here. And you're welcome to come visit me in Durham at any time. It's a beautiful new building. It's very different than when I was an undergrad.
Yeah.
That building looked really
And I just wanted to quickly on top of that, I utilized internships a little bit during my undergrad experience, but if I would have utilized internships the way that I've seen other people in a few years ahead of me in my career, there's some people who utilized an internship at every moment that they had a break from classes. And that was something that I thought was a way far out kind of expectation. I was like, that's what Harvard kids do. That's not what I do here. But every internship experience that I had, paid and unpaid, was so incredibly useful because it either gave me information on what does it look like in the day if this was my job. And it gave me a lot of information about things that I thought that I wanted to do and pursue. And then I saw what the days looked like. And I was like, that's not it. I'm going to go somewhere else. And then I, finally found where I am now through an internship. But I really highly recommend utilizing as much of your spare time to pursue internships as possible. There's lots of great ones that ASU offers, and shamelessly, I have to plug the legislature. I think it's the best because it is paid and you get free tuition for the semester.
And
So
it's also not drudgery work. You are literally working alongside all of us. You are
there's no
in many,
getting caught.
yeah, you are in many respect our peers. So
And then, sorry, really quickly on that internship note, in the internships, the film internships I did truly led me to the career that I had. One of my first internships that Dr. Sandler helped me get, it was called the Disney Intern, and I just promoted Disney movies like while I was out here. That led to when I actually applied at a Walt Disney Studios internship, then seeing that like, oh, she's already been a Disney intern. I got that internship. And with internships too, it actually expedited my learnings at ASU, and it helped me graduate a year and a half early as well. So like practical experience mixed with just like the education of, the foundations of storytelling. So thank you for saying that. I'm like, oh yeah, internships. Yeah, yes, please take advantage.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Also thinking about other passions you have, like volunteering or advocacy work. Another thing that I've done as a professor that would maybe surprise some students is able to work with nonprofits about topics that I'm really passionate about. My work is on the borderlands, so I have a lot of like personal motivation to work to change certain things about the situation in the borderlands. And so that also, I think what we're all saying is that it maybe doesn't seem connected at the moment. It seems like you're doing a bunch of different things, but you never know how things will come together later.
It's great.
Big
point.
+1, I won't add anything else. Just +1 across the board. I wouldn't be where I am without internship, and then getting involved in the community is so important. Like there's more to life than being so head down on career and like climbing whatever that ladder, whether it's a ladder or like a slip and slide or whatever. Like, it's so much more important to like really hone those skills and follow that passion, because sometimes it does lead to a professional.
Sure does. And I'll just emphasize a couple of things here. Internships, really important, can lead to jobs. We're lucky we have Ruby sitting in the audience and she's so good at getting our people internships. And
I think you helped me. I think you were my person. Thank you.
she's been an angel to so many people in the English department and elsewhere, and a real evangelist for why internships matter, transform lives. And another thing I want to say about that is never imagine that you're on your own. We invest heavily in support for anything that you want to undertake. It's not a go at it in some heroic mode, head down, I'm going to work this out. Take advantage of everyone here who's to help, staff, faculty. And then finally, to just emphasize what Anita said, it's amazing to me how many students talk themselves out of interacting with their professors by saying, oh, they're so busy, I can't imagine they have time. we're lonely. We sit there. Nobody comes to office hours. It's a blow to the ego. That no one is. In all seriousness, I mean, that is actually partly true. We are paid to interact with you, but more importantly, it's our mission to interact with you. But build your network. You also do have to think about getting people to get to know you so that they can write you good letters. They can be on the phone when you need a job recommendation. I happily do that for so many students, but if I have personal information, if I've seen the growth, it helps me to narrate a compelling story. So think about it that way. You deserve a network of support. You deserve it. So build it. There's nothing wrong with that. And finally, maybe one tiny other addition, and I think it was starting to come out through the conversation here. Part of that network of support are the peers that you have in your classes. You likely see many of them for the rest of your life. You'll keep running into them. They'll help you out. You'll help them out. I mean, it really is amazing what that can do.
I mean, you never know. If you go talk to a professor, I ended up babysitting one of my professor's kids for like a year and a half. So you never know. It's also maybe a side hustle.
Jesus, I've had students walk my dog. Good for everyone involved.
There you go. Just find out how cute their dog is.
That sounded like an insinuation. My dog's really cute. Any additional advice that you would give? I mean, we talked about networking, maximizing interactions with professors. Any other things that if we think about the audience we have here today, we think about the audience watching us on Zoom, you'd like to pass along to empower them to feel a little bit more in control of right now as career building time?
I mean, I think the big one point, and it's a point that both Lou and Anita have already made, is that there's no substitute for having a conversation with someone who's already out in the job market or already out in a given career. There's no substitution for emailing them, asking them to coffee, and promising that it'll only be 15 minutes, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But just to pick their brain about how they got to where they're at. What was their educational background? What sort of information do they consume? What recommendations would they have? That's a really meaningful way of doing networking, especially if they also might have recommendations for other people you can talk to. Oftentimes we're bombarded by emails, but if I see in a subject line something that says, hey, referral from this person I work with, I know that I'm going to make that email a priority and respond to it accordingly. Doing meaningful networking like that, having face-to-face conversations with people, and not just once, but following up with them multiple times, is a really good way to build up a solid network. And along those lines, if you're interested in the foreign policy realm of things, there's a lot to be said for going to public meetings that are hosted by state agencies or by city councils, the county board of supervisors. Come down to the legislature and hang out at a committee hearing. You'll meet a lot of interesting people who come from a lot of different walks of life. And if you're interested in the policy realm, it's a good way to make a initial first impression along those lines. So just your professors and faculty are definitely there to help you out. I wouldn't have gotten to where I'm at without the support of my professors, especially the three who suffered through my master's thesis. But there's also a lot of people outside the academy too who are more than willing to help you out.
I think that's incredibly important, like not being afraid to just ping someone on LinkedIn if you have a shared connection. I talked to a lot of students who are trying to find that path. And they find me on LinkedIn, and actually some of them don't even have LinkedIn, and they ask me, do I need LinkedIn? And I'm sorry, yes, all of your employers are old and on LinkedIn. And so that's important. And I would say just ask us to coffee. Like, we like meeting fellow Sun Devils. We like being able to provide something that maybe we ourselves didn't really have. And then I can tell you too, like, our networks are pretty big. Like, even if you're like, I don't know what the hell public affairs is, I don't want to be a public affairs person, like, I probably know a bunch of people in advertising, journalism, TV, you name it. And even on the technical side, I work with some of the smartest engineers on the planet. And so, like, just even thinking through that, like, who could this person be connected to? You don't always know. And so I say just utilize that ASU alumni network as much as you can.
I wish that I had learned to ask for help and how to ask for help earlier in my life as a human being, but especially in terms of career, there's an element to just having the courage to reach out, which we know there's lots of structural reasons that can be really difficult. I mean, it's hard for everyone, but it can be especially difficult for certain students. And people don't always respond to you, right? Sometimes people will be enthusiastic, but everyone has missed emails, everyone has done that. And so also learning how to not take that personally, knowing when's the right time to be persistent, that's all sort of tied up with mentoring and part of life and part of being curious, which is so great. Getting to be at a university, these are fantastic years to get to think broadly and be curious and take advantage of asking for help and practicing asking for help, because you're going to have to do that maybe more than anything in your careers for the rest of your life, no matter what you do.
Absolutely. And like piggybacking off of that, it's like I like how you said, because you're basically going to be asking for help, or a wise thing to do is throughout your career, not just academically. And so putting myself in your shoes, I remember being, you know, slightly overwhelmed, like you're juggling classes, you're juggling, like said, internships, like what the heck is next? And one thing I wish I could have also told myself back then is like, you can't pour from an empty cup. So like you taking care of yourself, and Amanda, you said this in your podcast too, like just be kind to yourself, like even in academics, because, you know, you're not operating at 100% is not good for any of us. And that taking care of yourself will just make you a better, you know, student, better intern, better, you know, future career person, whatever you choose to do. And yeah, just take care of yourself, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make you thrive in your life.
And I agree with all of that. I'm just thinking about if you gave me a time machine right now, I am self-learning a policy area that I didn't learn. And one thing that I wish that I had done while I was in university, and I tried to do this as much as I could, but it's kind of hard because you have classes that you're required to take. You've got things that everyone's like, you need to take this type of class and do what interests you and try something new. But take a step back and try and see your blind spots, which is really hard. But just try and take a view. Your education is different than anybody else's in this room. No one has received the exact same education that you've received. And you're going to go off and you're going to go into your field, and there's going to be blind spots that you have. And right now I am clawing at information, trying to fill in those spaces where if I would have just taken a quick step back and realized that I didn't take a certain history course, or I didn't take, there's just things that now I have to teach myself. Whereas if I would have realized it while I was still at school, I could have taken that class, it would have fulfilled a requirement instead of taking some class that I felt like was going to be easy, or, you know, something else. And just taking an inventory of your expertise, what you know, and where you think maybe you could fill in some of those blanks now while you're still able to take those classes. Sometimes you'll have an employer that will pay for you to take those classes in the future, and sometimes you won't. And I am jealous of everyone who still has the opportunity to just look at a class, a whole row of classes, and if I want to take these 3 classes, because I would love to do that. So just trying to, it sounds really hard, and I know, but just trying to take that inventory for yourself.
So last question before we open it up to the audience. We've talked a great deal about career success and how to maximize your chances. What is there to learn from failure? Because we all fail, no matter how many doors we try to open, some remain shut. So lessons from failure.
Well, I can share one anecdote, and hopefully it'll prove illuminating in some capacity. So I did my master's thesis on the history of transporting groundwater across basins in Arizona, which is a complex topic. And I was ideally situated to go on to a career in water policy. Usually the path that a lot of people take in the state towards that is that they get an entry-level job with the Department of Water Resources. They work there for 3 to 5 years and they move on to something else water related. But at the time that I was graduating, there weren't any jobs available. In fact, they weren't even sure when I contacted them whether they had a spare desk available for an unpaid internship. And I had already been, by that point, while I was in graduate school, living with my parents, and I didn't want to become, I'd already been, a recently graduated undergraduate with no career prospects, living with my parents, and I didn't want to repeat the same thing with graduate school. So I jumped at the first opportunity that was available to me, and that was to work at the Auditor General doing performance audits, which are basically evaluations of the state agencies' processes and operations. And I did that for 5 years, but even while I was doing that, I was trying to find a way to get a water job, and nothing ever seemed to work. And there came a point towards the end where I had actually gotten an interview and I thought it went well, and it turns out it didn't because I didn't get the job. And by that point, I was at my wit's end. I was frustrated and I just needed something different. And I actually at that point made the decision that, well, this doesn't seem to be in the works for me. I just need to go and try something else. While I was at the Auditor General, most of the audits I had done were education related, and that involved everything from the Empowerment Scholarship Account Program, which is essentially a school voucher program, to actually doing audits at the state's 3 universities. I did the one that was based on student graduation and retention and what efforts could be done to improve that. And it happened that to be the case that at the legislature, several of the nonpartisan research staff had quit or gone other places, including a slot for an education analyst. And I had a contact there who made me aware of that and elbowed me rather firmly to tell me, hey, you don't like your job at the Auditor General, try this instead. It's at least a legislative staff position. So I put in my resume, got a call back, I think 24 hours later, did an interview, and I think got the job within 48 hours. And I went into my first legislative session, which was 2019, thinking that I guess this is the new normal. It's not water. It wasn't anything that I'd necessarily gone to school for, but I still have a skill set that I think can apply towards this, and I'll find a way to make it work. And I largely seem to work, aside from a really nasty bout of appendicitis at the very end of session. But what actually happened though after session is that our person who was in my current role decided to get a job elsewhere, and my position opened up. I put in for it, and lo and behold, I'm here. So if there's a lesson in this, it's that, or at least the lesson I think I take away in retrospect, though it was pretty frustrating to go through at the time, is that and this gets back to a point I made earlier, there's no linear path. And sometimes you're just in a job, just so you can gain a certain set of knowledge, skills, and ability and move on to the next job where you'll find a different set of knowledge, skills, and ability. And maybe that'll get you closer to what ultimately is a desired job. But there's a way, and this gets back to your point about working in healthcare administration, there's a way to make every job meaningful, or to sort of push your responsibilities around in such a way that you can find meaning in it. Usually, most jobs. People also probably work some dead-end jobs that have been terrible. So just, it's not going to be perfect, but there's a way to find meaning in your jobs. And usually I think there's this gravity of some kind or another that guides us to where we ultimately want to be. Some of us are there, some of us aren't quite there yet.
I was gonna say, here's a lesson in reframing what feels like failure as success, as just as building toward future success. How about, has anyone, and don't have to say it if this hasn't happened, had the kind of stinging failure where you learn either, I don't want to do this, this is not me, or I need to up my game because I didn't know enough, or I didn't do enough, those kinds of personal realizations.
So I don't know. I don't know if anybody in here is pursuing the idea of law school, but for me, when I first decided that I wanted to be a humanities major, I wanted to pursue philosophy, I thought the only path, the only thing at the end of that tunnel was law school. So I, to myself, said, oh, I could do law school. I could love law school. I could love being a lawyer. I could pursue that path because I enjoyed the education that I was receiving. And so I staunchly advocated for myself to many people because they'd be like, well, what the heck are you going to do with a philosophy degree? I was like, I'm going to go to law school. And let me tell you, this happened quite often while I was a server in a Scottsdale restaurant. And so there were many very interesting people who sometimes looked down on servers, saying, well, you're in school. What are you going to do with a philosophy degree? And it would almost be like my little bit of armor, right? I'd be like, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to be amazing. And I'm going to have this awesome career and it's going to be great. And just you watch, right? Random stranger that I'm never going to meet again. And it was really important to me. And then I came to ASU and I did all of the things, and I was at Barrett and I was, really putting myself in rooms with lawyers and doing all these things. And then I got the opportunity through Barrett to take a law class, and record scratch, I hated it. It was not what I enjoyed about being in school. Everyone else was miserable there. And every time I told a lawyer I wanted to be a lawyer, they're like, don't do that. That's a bad idea. I'm like, what is this happening? Like, I didn't know. But it was my identity. It was, I am a humanities person and I'm going to be successful because I'm going to be a lawyer, and you can't take that away from me. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I think I have to take this away from me. And I had to mourn that vision that I had for my life and this concept that I had created that was going to bring me value as a person, as a worker, as a student. Everything that I had built up that was like, this is what's going to be great. I didn't want anymore. And it took us a full semester of me. And then I had to start telling the people around me, because they were like, yeah, Hannah's going to go to law school. And then I started to be like, oh, about that, this is awkward. And I had some people that really championed I changed my mind. And I try and be that for people now, because then there were other people who were like, oh, it's fine. Everyone hates law school and everyone hates being a lawyer apparently, but it's okay. You'll still enjoy it. And this is not to say that lawyers don't like their life. I just didn't enjoy what I was looking at. And so it was really devastating for me. And it was like mentally, physically, emotionally, really hard to move away from that. And I have known, so I was in like a Barrett class, and every single one of it was probably 30 people, every single person, lawyer, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, every single one of us in that room. And I have been there for probably 10 or 12 people who have also changed their mind and lost that identity that they had of what they viewed as success. And I'm so thankful now that that's not the path that I chose. I know I could have done it, but I'm very thankful that I had the courage and the ability to change my mind, and that people were there for me. So sometimes it just doesn't work out the way that you think it will, and it's okay to change your mind, even if it's something that you thought you wanted to do forever.
That exact same thing happened to me.
I know, me too. I'm like, if you
I
just
also
change
took,
that, yeah.
I took a law class as a Barrett student too. I was
Yeah,
like,
so did I.
no shade on lawyers. My husband's a lawyer. He'd be happy to talk to anyone if they want mentoring. But I love that advice about also who you are is not what you do, no matter what you do. And like, in some ways, failure is like the most prominent theme in academia. Every book that you see has been peer reviewed by people who potentially rejected an earlier version. Every article you read is just like constant rejection of applying for things. And you see our accolades, but behind every one thing we got was 100 things that we didn't get that we applied for. And it's like that, I think, in a lot of jobs, right? You look at someone's resume or CV and you see all their successes, but behind that was a lot of misses. And those can be really hard to weather. So I love what what you say in terms of the difficulty of working through that. And we talked sort of about maybe a professional network, but you also need to be a human being with who derives meaning from a diverse array. It's different for everyone, but a diverse array of parts of who you are. And I think that college is a really special time to explore those parts of your life as well. And the sooner that you can sort of build that for yourself, then the better you'll be long-term, really, no matter what career you are. And probably, I think you probably even will be more successful in whatever you end up doing if you can sort of work through that. It's really, really hard to have a dream and then that dream isn't what you thought, even if you do get your dream job. And that, I think that happens so often. It's when you're doing it and it's the reality, it's always going to be different.
And that mourning period that you touched on, it 100% is. I think it sounded like you handled yours very like supportively, like bringing people and letting you know. I went into hermit mode for like a couple months, just like truly like being by family, close friends, and just a lot of therapy just to try to recenter and find that human being that was like, okay, I loved movies once, maybe I don't enjoy making them, but I loved it. How can I like, maneuver that to be something else? And just knowing that change is a-okay is also something that's good to hear. And just recognizing failure is like a pretty strong word. And I understand that sentiment, like not getting a job maybe feels like failure, all these things. But I almost, now that I just have a little bit more hindsight, I recognize that just led me, might not necessarily be a failure, just led me to a better path for me. Because since moving back, I've gotten like, my fiance will attest to this, I get calls now for shows that I'm like, okay, if you were asked me like maybe 3 years ago, I'd have been like, yes, please. But because I have that hindsight, it's like, you don't have, or with that hindsight, I'm better able to say like no more confidently because of a new dream and a new career. So it makes it, I don't know, there's a light at the end of the morning period and a better tomorrow.
It's such a good way of putting it. And in some ways, it's wrong for me to use that word failure, but I only used it to provoke
No,
some
absolutely.
stories. I hope what everyone saw from that is it really became part of a journey, and that having the rough waters as part of the journey is actually an important part of getting to where you want to go. All right, we have a few minutes left. If anyone here would like to ask any questions of our panelists, and someone ready to go.
Thank you guys for you guys have given really good advice about kind of more traditional routes to internships, networking. Do you guys have any advice for someone like myself? I'm 4 years old. I work full time. I have a family I'm taking care of. Is there any advice for maybe more non-traditional routes, or I guess that would be the best way to put it, more non-traditional routes that maybe someone who's a little bit older could still pursue a career in humanities, but they might not have the opportunities to. I wouldn't say like the opportunities aren't there, but they are minimalized, I guess.
I really have something for this because Paul kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but there is a really easy way to network without having to do any of the like internships and stuff like that. And it is, and I think a couple of us have mentioned LinkedIn. First of all, do you have a LinkedIn?
Not that.
Get a LinkedIn.
Yeah, I
And
make
put
everyone in my
everything you've
students
done.
sign up for LinkedIn. It seems horrible and tedious, but in fact, the connections that come out of there, and some of the best LinkedIn accounts are like ASU English, for example. You will find so many connections there because you'll immediately enter an alumni network.
But
And there are people that will help you out.
yeah, and ASU will help you build a LinkedIn profile, so definitely seek that out. But something that I found, which people in our field use all the time, I don't know if everybody else does this, but it's pretty common in our field, where you look up a place you are interested in working or a type of job that you're interested in looking, because LinkedIn has this really interesting search function where you can look up a job title or a Arizona Department of Administration, and then you can look that up. So it'll list anybody who has worked there or does work there. And then you can make that list smaller by looking up ASU alumni or, whatever. I've looked up, I was interested in talking to somebody out of state that does my job. I was like, what would it look like if I was trying to find a job out of state? So I looked up someone who had worked at the Arizona State Legislature and worked in the field that I was interested in an entirely different state. And I found 3 people who had my job and moved out of state. And I sent all 3 of them a message and was like, hey, just curious, just wanted to chat with you. It can be a pretty quick phone call. And then all of a sudden you send this message, all 3 of them responded. I had 30-minute conversations with each of them. And now I have these people who are like, yeah, if you ever want to move, which I don't, I love Arizona, but they were like, yeah, if you ever want to move, give me a phone call and I'll see what I can do for you. And people want to help people that reach out to them. And so you don't have to do the internships. You don't have to take the class. You can just, and I have known people who do it religiously. I know one person and his goal for his, he sets a goal for himself weekly and he does one of those phone calls every single week. And it's huge. So that's my recommendation.
My +1 to this is that I've had an intern who's in his 30s last summer. So, I mean, there's also kind of, you're never too old to pursue that job that you want. He went back to school and at the time he was like, hey, during the summer, I'm curious if I can be one of your interns. And so, and he was actually across the country, he wasn't even physically in the same state as me. So I think too, just keeping that in mind that that's not always a barrier.
It's also kind of what my question was too. Do you think it's a case of maybe you need to find alternate routes, or you need to kind of adapt the more traditional style to, your life contributing?
Well, I also think that non-traditional students, people who have a different path, who are, I think college students bring a lot of interesting vibrancy, traditional college students who are young, but non-traditional students have lived some life. And that is amazing. That is a benefit that when we have graduate students who have done something in the world, you're bringing a rich and important and highly desirable perspective. And so I think also treating that in your own internal narrative as, hey, I'm at an advantage in some ways compared to people because I know a lot of things. I've had these experiences. I have certain wisdom that a 19 or 20-year-old person is not going to have. And also, I will say, I think maybe you're in a similar situation to me, and you have limited time, right? When you have a family and suddenly you have to do things in a more efficient and tight way. And I do think that one of the benefits of ASU, and I will say I'm new here, so I'll defer to Dean Cohen and other ASU folks in the room because I've only worked here for 7 weeks or something, but has a lot of resources. And that is one of the great advantages of being at a place like this that is huge, that has an incredible infrastructure. It's let the ASU network and their resources help you make efficient use of your time and what you're trying to do, because I hear you, you maybe don't have time to do an internship in addition to classes because you've got a lot going on, but that isn't to say that there isn't some way that you can, do these things. And really you do have a lot to offer, I'm sure.
One final piece of advice I'll offer is that in tandem with talking with others and maybe doing some level of networking and an area that interests you, there's tremendous value in trying to turn around papers that you do for a course, or if you're doing a thesis, which frankly, I would encourage everyone here to do an undergraduate thesis. If you can do that in such a way that it becomes a meaningful work product that you can include in the job application, that it deals with a subject matter that's germane to your job, or it displays some interesting analysis that meshes well with your job. Maybe it's a balance of qualitative and quantitative analysis. If there's a way all the same to make that sort of the basic writing sample that you're able to provide, that's a good way to make the best use of your course, of what you already have to do as part of your coursework. And alongside that, definitely talk, and not to sound like a broken record, but do talk with others in a career field that you're interested in as you're going about that assignment. And if they're up for it, send them a copy and see what they make of it. They might have a lot of valuable suggestions on how to shape it so that you've got something that really gets your foot in the door around the time that you graduate.
And I'm so glad that you actually brought that up, that this is for everyone who's here. Never apologize for who you are, or what you've done. Your experiences are part of your identity and they're your strengths. They're not anything to think that they're not a challenge if you think of them in the right way. And the wisdom of having lived a certain number of years is actually a powerful thing. I counsel a lot of my former students who are now about your age and feel like they need a different career because it didn't work out, and they panic about starting over. And a lot of what I do is to remind them of where they've been and what that's given them, and that sets them apart. So yeah, I appreciate it. Yes.
Major now, which is but I really I guess I'm started first year on Zoom. I almost felt like I was cheating my way through my class. It's not that I actually cheated, right? But that I didn't have that college experience and I didn't have that influence. So very isolating at certain times. What advice would you give to trying to make sure that they're passing what we might feel as though they're all with like where they started in the college?
I think you have a unique perspective than when any of us went to school, but I think what you are like, you being here, you like choosing and being empowered to do the triple major, you know, it sounds like you are being authentically you. And I think that you're in good company, I guess, so to speak. Like, don't know if I can speak for all of humanities, but you kind of feel like a little bit of an outlier. Like, I come from a family mainly of STEM. And so choosing a humanities already feels like, oh, okay. So I think one, you should be very, very empowered to, you know, have made that decision for you, because that's huge. And I think with that too, though we might not have the perspective of being in school during a freaking pandemic, the fact that you are fully embracing, it looks like now, what you can at ASU, it's only going to make you a brighter, shinier student, like maybe like talking, like taking advantage of speaking with the peers, like before class, after class, just trying to make the most, because I think even though the pandemic made us feel very isolated, it's also in a very odd way, like a way to bring us together, to be like, okay, we are going through this together. So just wanted to, though I don't maybe have like practical advice, I just want to say, like, I hope you feel empowered that you are doing what's authentically right for you, and that you're in good company. And like, can't speak forever, but like, you're not alone, basically. Like, your peers, your counselors, your professors, alumni are all rooting for you too. And so whatever that experience looks like for you, for this weird college experience, like semi post pandemic, like, it's going to be, you're already doing the right things of choosing the stuff for you.
And I think something that's important, this is something that I do and I've done for a very long time, but when I face hardship in my career or when I was in school, I keep a little journal about it. And it's not like a personal journal. It's more of a how to answer interview questions in the future, because you're going to get an interview question at some point in your career that's going to tell me about a hard time that you overcame something. And you are one of, I mean, it's not going to be forever that everyone's going to have experienced university during a pandemic.
Right.
And so you are going to have this very intense experience that not only did you make it through, but you are thriving, like you're here, you're doing well, you're triple majoring, that's amazing. And so you can take that experience now, process it now, and then I just keep those with me. I have them on a drive. And before I have an interview, I go through some of those experiences that I've had so that I can refresh my memory. And you're going to have this experience and you're going to be able to say forever Well, I killed it at university during the middle of the pandemic. Like, do you remember what you were doing during the pandemic? Because I was in school trying my absolute best, and if I can get through that, I can get through anything.
That's so well said. Yeah. The bad news is too, if it wasn't Zoom University that made you feel incompetent, something else would. Right? It's just life. We've all
Yeah,
lived
yeah.
with this feeling that there's something that we're missing or whatever, but I love the reframing of well, what strengths do I have? I think that's the best way forward. Did we have any questions from online? I want to make sure that we address them. Okay, good. So I was hoping to leave a little bit of time at the end for anyone who would like to interact with our panelists more personally, rather than keep us here for the next 15 minutes. Because I know sometimes public questions are not the same as what you might want to say to someone if you come up. So unless there are burning or urgent questions someone would like to ask as a public question, can we all join in thanking our panelists today who did such a terrific job? They will be hanging around, so please feel free to come up, introduce yourselves. They're here for you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.